Welcome back to the Exponential Athlete podcast. This is part 3 of the Anatomy of Excellence series on Tiger Woods. Today, we're going to be focusing on outside factors that helped him to become successful, essentially things that are outside of his control, as well as the price of the approach that he took. Again, we're not going to be focusing on all of the effective drama that happened off the golf course. It's more what are the things that happened on the golf course, or what are the constructs that he used that could have had negative consequences down the road. This is related to his body, this is related to his mind, this is related to the system that his family put in place related to standard operating procedure. First, let's start with his background and some things that were a bit outside of his control. So the first thing that I want to touch on is Tiger's family and Tiger's team. So there was this concept early on called Team Tiger, where Tiger's dad, Tiger's mom, as well as Jay Brunza and a few other people all worked together to create the perfect environment for Tiger to grow up and succeed in the game of golf. He learned the right things. He had the right coaching. There was this little cocoon that was created around him. This is Earl. Early on, we sat down and decided that Tiger would be the first priority in our relationship from that point on, that Tida would stay home and raise Tiger, and that since I had recently retired from the military service, I would enter the workplace to earn a living. So his parents were completely dedicated to him succeeding in golf. They dedicated all their time, all their resources, all of their energy. This is Tiger. My parents were really good at encouraging me in the game without pushing me or making me feel like I played poorly. My job was to try my best. The results didn't matter because I'd learned from it whether it was a good result or not. I was lucky in that way. So this is something we saw in Kobe as well. So yes, Kobe's dad wanted him to play basketball. Yes, Tiger's dad wants him to excel in golf, but there isn't necessarily a tremendous amount of pressure to do so. I believe that Tiger's dad did a very good job at introducing Tiger to the game of golf in a way where Tiger felt that it was his own idea, it was his own free will doing this, and his dad, and the parents in both cases, just cultivated that. I think the idea of pushing a kid too hard without them enjoying it, pushing them to practice, rather than having to ask to practice or play or do these things, is something that is not going to instill joy of the process in the kids. Tiger was also an only child, and I believe that he used golf as a coping mechanism or golf as a way to find himself. There's a couple instances where, essentially Tiger, where he feels most comfortable is with his golf clubs doing this activity. It's something that reminds him of his family. It brings him this level of comfort. This is very similar also to Kobe Bryant, as we described before. So Kobe did have sisters, but when he was growing up, he grew up in Italy. He didn't speak the language. He didn't have familiarity with a lot of these people. And the one constant for him was basketball. If he didn't know what to do, if he felt lonely, he could always have the ball. He could always go practice. This is very similar for Tiger as well. As an only child, he learned early on that his parents were the only ones he should truly trust and rely on. They more or less programmed him that way. His father took on the roles of golf mentor, sage, visionary, and best friend. Instead of carrying around a security blanket or a stuffed animal, Tiger dragged a putter from one end of the house to another. It seldom left his hand. This is Tiger. I was an only child, and the club and ball became my playmates. The feeling of solitude and self-reliance enhances the game's attraction for me and endures today. And this is a common theme in athletes as well as golfers. I recall from a conversation with two of the greatest golfers of our time, Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, that the game had a similar appeal to them. Golf affords you supreme independence. So Tiger, by playing and practicing, he found himself, he found solitude, he found enjoyment. And that's something that carries through his whole life. Imagine if you're playing in the highest stakes game in your entire life, and the game itself is a place of comfort to you. It's a place you went for solitude. To me, that's a really interesting phenomenon where what people view as pressure or drudgery to practice or perform at this high level, it is where Kobe felt most at home with the sport that they picked up. Tiger also was isolated in some sense because of how he looked. This is not a good thing, but it was a driving force in Tiger's life. This is Hank Haney. As I observed him, I began to see him as a lone wolf. Nobody else in golf was like him. The son of an African-American father who was a career soldier and an Asian mother who was a devout Buddhist, both of whom had poured all they had into their only child together. They'd raise an outsider and send him on a singular journey. This isn't something that I believe is a good or a bad thing. Well, it's obviously bad that he was isolated and didn't have the camaraderie that a lot of people had, but that being different from other people does provide some form of independence. I'd interviewed Shane Battier during the Kobe season. He said he experienced some of this. He was half black. He had some experiences that other people couldn't relate to. I'm not comparing myself to these great athletes, but I also had this experience where I am half Chinese, half white, and all the Chinese kids thought I was too white, and all the white kids thought I was too Chinese to really get along with. And so this did force a sort of stark independence in me, and I see that in a lot of people who are in between worlds. Let's focus more specifically on Earl Woods. I think his background is particularly important. So Earl came from the military. He was a Green Beret. He was also a trainer. He worked specifically with some of the psychological warfare techniques that he was using on Tiger, and he was teaching those. To Earl's credit, he had, from what I've read, some personal character flaws, but when he was working with Tiger, he seemed to do a lot of the right things. And I want to go through what some of those things are. So first, Tiger says he never pushed me to play. Whenever I practiced or played, it was always my idea. So Earl would play this little game with Tiger. So Tiger would call Earl up and he would say, "Dad, can I come practice today? Can I come play golf with you today?" And Earl would make him wait a little bit in suspense, and then he'd always say yes. But Tiger was the one who was always wanting more. It was never Earl pushing. So it was this pull relationship rather than this push relationship. But Earl somehow knew how to also be Tiger's friend and keep the lessons fun while using his deep love for his son as a strength. It reminded me of something Keith Kelvin used to say: "No one cares how much you know until you know how much they care." There is no doubt in anyone's mind that Earl and Tida love Tiger. And I think that that's a really important thing. If everything that Earl is doing, all of the tactics they're using to help Tiger improve are coming from a place of love, that's something that's fundamentally understandable. I could see Earl as a natural coach, very bright and intuitive, not only in his ability to impart golf or life lessons, but especially in being able to keep his son interested. So Tiger had this unbelievable gift in his dad, that his dad was already a teacher. His dad did have this experience in the military. His dad had a good understanding of the mind and driving factors around that, and he was able to impart that onto him. This is a little example of Earl sort of keeping Tiger wanting more. I probably should have read this a little earlier, but I don't think it's too late now. So Tiger says, "Daddy, can I practice with you today?" I would pause for an inordinate length of time, just long enough to engender the fear that Daddy was going to say no. I would, of course, say yes. This is Earl. One of the things that I pride myself on is that I have never, in Tiger's entire life, asked him to practice or told him to practice. That's an important thing. You want to instill intrinsic motivation in kids or anyone who's pursuing a sport. It shouldn't be about this extrinsic reward. Earlier, we talked about rewarding effort rather than rewarding the tangible success like wins, and Earl did a really good job of this as well. A lot of the mechanisms that keep someone involved and interested because of their own personal enjoyment are the things that breeds these great athletes over time. You see some of the athletes, not the greatest, burn out because they reached what their goal was. Their goal was to get to the NBA, their goal was to win a championship, and then they fizzle out. But the best play because they enjoy the game. They also have these other external factors as well, but the core of why they want to do it is internal and self motivating. Earl was also willing to do a tremendous amount of research. So Earl found places for Tiger to play. He helped him join the junior golf leagues that allowed him to play at all these different courses. He got the right coaches. He got all the right people. And so part of that was Earl's network. This is something, again, completely outside of Tiger's control. Earl knew the right people to help cultivate his son into this person. And if he did not know them, he would go out and find them. He would go out and find the right coaches. And this is sort of a flywheel snowball effect where Tiger was so good that coaches were very willing to work with him, or these people were willing to work with him, but Earl had to make that connection or reach out to these people to begin with. When Tiger was 4, I realized he was so talented that he needed the services of a professional to accelerate his development. So Earl also knows his own limitations. He realizes, hey, yes, I'm a scratch golfer. I love this game, but I'm not a professional teacher of golf. I need to find the right people to help Tiger succeed. Otherwise, I'm actually handicapping him. And it does appear Earl has a pretty high opinion of himself, fairly large ego, but at the same time, he realizes his shortcomings as a teacher and is able to go out and find people that can help improve Tiger's game that are beyond what he knows. I think that's really big of him, or was really big of him as a person. Earl also did some other things that I thought were interesting related to how he talked to Tiger, the way he raised Tiger, and I wanted to point those out. Tiger says, he made sure from when I was a kid that he didn't talk down to me. And he went so far as to lean down to my height when I was a little guy, something I do with Sam and Charlie. We planned a strategy at tournaments as far back as when I was 5 years old. There are pictures of me standing on the course with my golf bag on my shoulders, and there's my dad bending down to speak to me at eye level. That is giving Tiger accountability early on, treating him like he has control over his own destiny. He has some autonomy in this process. And I really like that. I think that that's a good practice, especially if you have kids and you're trying to raise them. It's never, you should do this. It's, we're going to do this, or explaining why you're going to do something. I'm not a father yet, but this is something that I really like about the approach that Earl took. Earl was also able to help secure some financing through, I think it was IMG. So Tiger was paid as a talent scout, very much how Joe Bryant was paid as a scout, in almost the exact same arrangement with Kobe. And this helped create better finances for the family. Something Tiger did not have is he did not come from a wealthy background. He did not have professional golfers or professional athletes in his bloodline that he could rely on and look to. And Earl did a wonderful job facilitating these types of things, getting him the opportunities, getting him the right instruction, getting him on the correct path. Now let's go on to Tida Woods. So Tida, Tiger's mom, she also clearly had a massive influence on how Tiger grew up. We talked in part 2 about how part of his alter ego is coming from the red shirt that comes from the Thai culture that his mom brings. But while Earl, in computer terms, may have wired Tiger's circuits, it was Tida who did the vital coding. She was the most responsible for Tiger's mental programming, his killer instinct. More than anyone else, she understood the price her son had paid. So Tida is the one in the field. She is the one going to all these tournaments. She's following Tiger every single round, keeping his score. She's the one who's talking to him on the car rides. She is the one that is instilling this killer instinct. And I think she might have been going a little far. You know, there are times where she was ridiculing some of the kids that he was playing against. She had some colorful nicknames for Phil Mickelson. But one, the fact that she is there, she is meeting Tiger's needs in the sense, and she's also able to help cultivate the mindset that they've put together, something that's very impressive. Something you see with both Kobe and Tiger is they pretty much only had to focus on their sport. Kobe didn't have to worry about laundry. He didn't have to worry about being fed, even a couple of years into the league when his parents were living with him. The same with Tiger. Tiger was someone who had everything he needed outside of golf, and he could just fully focus on that singular pursuit, which is not realistic or necessarily doable for a lot of people. But there are also ways that we could build that into our lives. That's something we probably can't do as a child. But for example, you can do meal kits if you're worried about your nutrition or diet. I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about what I'm going to eat, and a meal kit is a really good way to get exactly the food that I need without having to spend the mental energy. There's ways that we can automate these things, especially as we rise up in our level of success. Tida also had a massive influence on teaching Tiger meditation and some of the mindfulness techniques. She's someone that clearly has an influence in a bunch of these different ways. And it's a little bit different, hard to separate the mindfulness that he gets from the hypnosis and the mindfulness techniques that Jay Brunzo was using and the sort of Eastern philosophy that his mom was bringing. But it is very clear that's a big part of Tiger's life. As we know, Tiger grew up in California, in Southern California, which is, I wouldn't quite say a golf mecca, but it is a place where there's a lot of junior golf. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of places to play for young golfers. And Tiger did have access to those things. Tiger was able to play at the Navy golf course through his dad. And he also had the opportunity to play at a bunch of really great courses through some of the junior golf leagues. So he had the opportunity to play at some of these. Again, something he did not have was access to a country club. He was not one of these traditional golfers. And it's really impressive that he was able to do this where sort of country club living is the main route into professional golf to that point. I want to talk about some more of the advantages Tiger didn't necessarily have. There's nothing that I've read in any of the material that I've seen that suggested Tiger, from a physical perspective, was that far beyond all the other competitors. Tiger had built himself through exercise, through a lot of these things, into what he was. He trained his feel through these various techniques that we talked about in part 1. Tiger was built, he was constructed, rather than necessarily being all natural. There's some examples, some stories about how, or when Tiger and John Daly were at the same tournament, John Daly's having a beer after the round, and he says, "Tiger, why don't you join us?" And Tiger basically says, "If I was as talented as you, I would be drinking beers with you, but I have to go practice. That's how I develop my mastery." There are likely golfers that had more natural talent than Tiger, but Tiger squeezed every single drop out of the natural talent that he had. But at the same time, there might be consequences of squeezing every last drop out in the way that Tiger did. Let's talk about some of the downside to Tiger's success. When looking at how Tiger approached success, I think there are a couple different things that might have led for him to have more overall happiness or even better performance over time. And I want to sort of dive into what those are. The first thing that I want to touch on is this idea of the package. So the package is an idea that Hank Haney came up with, and this is a little excerpt about what that is, which led me to what I began to think of as the package. The package was a sum of all Tiger's qualities and characteristics, the good and the bad. Working from a starting point that Tiger was better and different from any other player, it followed that those differences were the things that made him better. It meant that tampering with the package was perilous. To put it another way, messing with Tiger was like fiddling with a solved Rubik's Cube. Though we never articulated it, I know Tiger believed in the idea of the package. It went along with the sense of destiny his father had passed to him, that he was put on this earth to do something extraordinary with his special qualities, to let the legend grow. But those qualities, foremost among them an extraordinary ability to focus and stay calm under stress, also included selfishness, obsessiveness, stubbornness, coldness, ruthlessness, pettiness, and cheapness. When they were all at work in the competitive arena, they helped him win. Tiger seemed to be talking about a radical change, which made me wonder how altering the package would affect his golf. Tiger's intense sense of mission when he played the game gave him fire, his focus, his incredible ability to find something extra at the most urgent moments. For all that success this had given him, what if that mission had helped mess him up in life? So a lot of his coaches growing up, Tiger developed some characteristics that might not necessarily be good in normal life versus in competition. Yes, you want to be emotionless, you want to be ruthless in competition, but that doesn't necessarily carry over to a family. That doesn't necessarily carry over to your friends or social engagements or any of those types of things. And I think Tiger, a lot of his coaches were worried about tampering with that. Hey, if we take some of the ruthlessness out off the golf course, will that affect him on the golf course? Will he lose his edge? And that is a constant fear of athletes. Something we can learn from the alter ego effect is you can bifurcate these things. You can have these different areas. And I think that might have been something that would have helped Tiger over the course of his career. For example, Kobe was able to very clearly create this other persona that had these characteristics. And in his family and home life, he was able to have these other characteristics. I will also say there's no evidence that Tiger had any of these characteristics around his kids. Everything that I've heard is he's a very good father. He does all these things correctly. But there's likely other areas of his life where some of these ruthless winning characteristics bleed over. So the idea that there weren't people in his life to maybe check him on some of these things for fear of messing up the success he was having on the golf course is something that possibly could have been avoided. Also, some more background, some more understanding of this alter ego effect could have potentially helped Tiger to be able to create these different personas and to turn them on when needed. There was also this idea of standard operating procedure that we talked about at length earlier. The idea that Tiger needs structure to succeed, and when structure starts to disappear, things kind of go off the rails. This is Hank Haney. I feel confident I've hit on the central issue. Certainly Tiger followed a plan with Butch early on, just as he followed a plan as an adolescent with John Anselmo. Indeed, I know that one of Earl's stock responses whenever he asked about Tiger's progress has long been, "It's all part of the plan." But it looks to me that since the end of Tiger's time with Butch, who said his emphasis was maintaining the swing changes Tiger has made, the plan has become less clear. So it's great to have a standard operating procedure. It's great to have structure around what you're doing. But what happens when the structure goes away? For example, when Tiger's dad died, a good part of his structure in his life disappeared. When he starts to have a family, when he starts other chapters of his life, there isn't necessarily a plan for that, and that can detract from the system he's created. So if we are someone that functions very well with a plan and we know that, we need to continue a plan or continue to have structure that we impose, or have people in our lives that help us to impose that structure. Tiger was able to have that structure with golf instructors. That's something that Butch provided. That's something that Hank Haney provided. That's likely something that other instructors going forward provide. But that he didn't necessarily have that in the other areas of his life. And that could be a reason why some of the other areas of his life sort of went a little bit off the rails. Tiger is very introverted. He did not like speaking with the media. He never trusted the media. He never trusted this group of people. But through his success, he inevitably had to encounter this. This isn't something I don't think is necessarily avoidable, but it is a peril of his success, is that he had to be in the limelight. He couldn't just go play golf. He also had media obligations. He also had social obligations. For better or for worse, his dad also was praising him as the chosen one and saying all these great things about him. But that was just more fuel to the fire of people wanting his attention and his time. And he specifically says he really loved when he was at Stanford because he was buffered from a lot of that. He could just focus on golf. He could just focus on his friends. And for the better part of his life, it was not that. He really was in the limelight all the time. I don't know if there's necessarily a better way you could go about this, but this is, again, a consequence of the path that he took in life in general. He just wanted to play golf. I was having trouble handling all the attention. Writers followed me when I walked to my car. Television cameras were in my face. I was being asked personal questions that had nothing to do with golf. That was the deal, and I realized I better adjust quickly. We're talking about Tiger. I think he was on TV for the first time at 2 years old. He was on again when he was 5 years old. He was a national phenomenon in high school, in college, and when he turned pro. There was not a moment of his life where he had this piece where he had effectively a normal childhood without media attention. And I can't imagine what growing up like that would do. I certainly wouldn't trust a lot of people, and I know Tiger certainly doesn't. I prefer to be insulated from the world outside of the ropes, though I knew I couldn't live like that. The golf is actually the easiest part, the part I love that I do. I went on to say that it was difficult to satisfy everyone who wanted a piece of my time, and that I learned to say no. So maybe saying no, maybe avoiding media obligations in the way Tiger did was the right thing to do. Tiger is loved by the fans, not necessarily loved by the media. And maybe that was the only way that he could navigate that landscape. Maybe that was the only way that he could really find the balance between playing golf at a high level and having any semblance of personal life and mental health and things along those lines. I think we forget at the highest level that all these people are still people. They still have the same feelings. They still have the same insecurities as all of us, but they're under so much more scrutiny. They're always under the spotlight, and that can be pretty pressure filled. I think a lot of us view it the other way as, wow, I would be lucky to have all that. I would be lucky to be good enough or to be dominating my sport or dominating my career enough that I have the quote unquote the luxury of having people following me everywhere. But if that's your whole life and that's all you know, that can be a lot for anyone. Something in particular that Tiger received a lot of heat for was that he didn't attend the Jackie Robinson ceremony that Bill Clinton invited him to after the Masters, after he won the Masters. So Tiger wasn't invited to the ceremony beforehand. It was after he won the Masters that he got invited. And, Tiger had planned this vacation. He planned all this rest, and he prioritized the rest and relaxation with his family over that ceremony. It's a very public thing for him to be criticized like that. It's a very public thing for people to put the spotlight on a 21-year-old kid to have those types of responsibilities. And with fame, with success, with all these things, there are responsibilities that you don't necessarily realize you have. And that is just added pressure that eats away at you. And this is Tiger struggling with that. At the same time, my life was changing while I was trying to force it to be the same. I needed to understand what was going on so that I could continue to compete at a high level. I didn't have the mental strength to compete at the US Open and soon ran out of physical strength. I could feel the intensity draining out of me after playing so many more tournaments than I had in college. I wasn't going to let that happen again. So you can see here there is some aspect of the media attention, all of this stuff that does affect his golf game. Yes, he's playing more golf, but he's also dealing with a lot more things emotionally, dealing with a lot more press, dealing with his time very differently. And there are negative consequences of that. Luckily, he had probably one of the best agents, and who's one of his really good friends, that could help him get the timing right. So Tiger's first agent, I don't remember exactly what his name is, out of college, was really focused on making Tiger a ton of money. So the agent makes more money, the more money Tiger makes. And that was at the expense of Tiger's time. So Tiger changed agents to Steiny, and he was able to refocus. So choosing your team and those types of things are really important. Something that was really clear in the section about what drives Tiger was that he was always in pursuit of the edge. And he did this through competition, but he also did this through other thrilling activities like scuba diving or military training. And there is some peril to that. That chasing of the edge or the thrill might have been something that made him great, but if you're always chasing that edge, you're going to be doing more and more dangerous activities. You're going to have more and more risky behavior, and that can effectively snowball. So understanding what the core motivating and driving factor of that is pretty important. And some would argue, I think most would argue, that Tiger probably overdid it a little bit with this pursuit of the edge. So the first area that you see that is in some of the military training that he was allegedly doing. In retrospect, in 2007, when Tiger began to lose the joy of playing and began to look at his career as something he wanted to get over with sooner rather than later, and the most obvious sign was his growing obsession with the military. But after a year, I realized I'd underestimated. When we were at his house and he was watching the Military Channel or the Buds Basic Underwater Demolition DVD, an exercise or training mission would catch his eye, and he'd make a comment like, "That would be cool. I'd really like to do that." When I asked Tiger how his trips had gone, he might confirm having completed a training session in a specific discipline by making a comment like, "Yeah, I knocked that out," as if he was passing progressive steps. When he shared some things about the experience, it was clear from phrases like total rush and intense that it was all a thrill. Nobody knows outside of Tiger how close he was to leaving golf, pursuing military exercises, doing things along those lines. And to be honest, that's perfectly within his right to do. We all have motivations. We all have things that bring us more joy than other things. On the other hand, I think it probably wouldn't have been great for golf if Tiger left to go pursue some of these other things. And at the end of the day, I also think that Tiger will be able to find the most joy and the greatest edge and rush in golf than anywhere else, because Tiger was the best. There's something about being the greatest. He also has kids now, and that's something he can share with his kids. These military activities, these types of hard training aren't something you can necessarily share with your kids all the time. Charlie is, I think he's 14 now or 15, and maybe he can share some of these other things. He can share working out. He can share some of these activities that are closer to the edge. He could probably share scuba diving, but there's a boundary to what that you can do on that front. And also, some of that military interest could have happened related to Tiger's dad. So Tiger clearly missed his dad when he passed away, and that it's a fairly common thing that people try to pursue their parents' path or deviate paths or have a little bit of a crisis when a parent passes away. Their fathers die, and they have the urge to go back to their hometowns and do what their dads did. Work in a coal mine, fix cars, whatever. It usually lasts about 6 months. Ken pointed out that baseball had been Michael Jordan's father's favorite sport. So even Jordan, when his dad passed away, he went and, so Jordan's dad was brutally murdered. He went and pursued baseball for a little bit. Part of it in memory, I think that could be a biological or psychological function where we have to a little bit fill the role of our parents over time. One of the biggest challenges for Tiger was his body breaking down. So he had all sorts of different knee injuries, surgeries, everything that you could think of. All right, on ESPN, there's a full injury timeline for Tiger Woods. So there's scar tissue removal in 1994. There's a cyst removal and a fluid drain in 2002. There's a shoulder injury that Tiger had in 2006. His ruptured ACL in 2007, the knee surgery he had for that ruptured ACL and fractured tibia in 2008, another ACL repair surgery in 2008. He tore his Achilles also in 2008. He had a neck injury in 2010, sprained his MCL and Achilles in 2011, another same knee injury in 2011, hurt his left Achilles tendon in 2012. He started having back issues in 2014. He started having these crazy back spasms related to his discs. He had his first back surgery in 2014, another back surgery in 2015, another back procedure in 2015. And then in 2017, he had another back surgery. And then he got into this car accident where more recently, he got his back fused. And then he got in another car accident where he injured his leg and he had to get his ankle fused. So Tiger has gone through all sorts of different injuries, some of them from the golf course, most of them from off the golf course. And the question is, could Tiger have adjusted his training regimen? Could he have adjusted his approach to the gym to perhaps be a little bit less demanding on his body? Tiger was injured very likely more than any professional golfer. I mean, golfers usually deal with injuries over time. For example, Freddie Couples has had a bad back for a very long time, but Tiger dealt with multiple different things. And it's likely from the approach that he took to training or things he was doing off the golf course that had all these detrimental effects. On the other hand, we have to ask, was the training he was doing off the golf course that was very rigorous, did the benefits of the strength he gained as well as the mental toughness that he gained outweigh the injuries that he had? And that's a question nobody can answer. I would argue I probably would have approached the training a little bit different, but I am not Tiger Woods. I was already getting used to injuries, having had my first knee surgery back at school. I wished it wasn't that way, but there wasn't much I could do but to be mentally tough enough to cope with any pain to play through it. So Tiger looks at the silver lining in his injuries is that they did make him more mentally tough over time. Would he have been able to deal with playing without an ACL and a fractured tibia in 2008 if he did not have that mental toughness built up from previous injuries? Probably not. And this is Tiger on that. This doesn't mean that I regret my decision to keep going hard. I can live with the choices I've made. I made my swing changes to improve and compensate for my injuries. I worked out because I enjoyed it and because I believed it would only make me stronger physically and mentally. So there is another aspect of fitness, is that enjoyment. And Tiger loved these hard workouts. He felt they were fulfilling. It made him feel more like the professional athlete that he was. And I also think that that's something we can't compensate for. We only get to live one life. If that's something that you really enjoy, even if it has negative effects in the long term, it's your right, it's your choice to make those decisions. After about the 5th wind sprint, I noticed Tiger was limping as he walked back. I couldn't help myself and said, "Tiger, you're limping. Come on, what are you doing?" He said, "No, I'm fine. This helps me build up body speed." He said he got the idea for the workout from his friend Vincie Glenn, a former defensive back for the San Diego Chargers, who sometimes visited Tiger in Orlando. The source of the advice was ironic because in the past I'd heard Tiger make comments about how NFL guys broke down their bodies not just with hitting in game, but also through intensity of their workouts. And here he was doing something an NFL guy did. So something fascinating about Tiger is there are inherent paradoxes. He says one thing, he does another. Those exist in all of us. Nobody is a true light, but also the paradoxes help to make us creative. In the book, I think it's The Art of the Impossible I'm reading now, something that I was surprised at is creativity comes from, diametric forces. So someone can be organized and also cluttered at the same time. And if they have both of those characteristics, there's a higher probability that they're creative, that they are exceptional in that sense. And Tiger is no different than that. Tiger was unbelievably creative, but creativity doesn't always come from a place of making perfect logical sense. And thus, inherently as humans, we are contradictory. And that's okay. Sometimes it's better to be completely consistent. It's a little easier to understand and read people if they're consistent. But the contradictories that we have in ourselves are things that can create benefit in performance or in creativity or some of these other areas. It seemed that the harder the workout was, the more enthusiastic Tiger would get about its possibilities. And that is inevitably what it is. Tiger looked at working out. He looked at essentially the breakdown of his body as a necessary consequence for toughening his mind, as well as building the muscles that he wanted and the enjoyment of the hunt. As it comes to working out, as it comes to the golf swing, we can know too little or we can know too much. And there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where essentially, if we don't know a lot, we believe we know a tremendous amount. And the more about a subject we know, the less we appraise ourselves on knowing over time. So a PhD in artificial intelligence will tell you he knows relatively little about artificial intelligence. A YouTuber making videos about artificial intelligence who isn't an expert in the field will say they know a lot about artificial intelligence. And Tiger runs into this issue related to the golf swing at a certain point of time. He knows a tremendous amount about the golf swing, but does he know enough to be able to truly make the changes that he wants? Maybe he does now, but at least early in his career, when he would try to do things himself, he got into trouble. One misconception was that he knew more about the golf swing than any other modern player. Though Tiger definitely possessed a great deal of knowledge, he proved that he didn't have enough to fix himself. The fact was, purely self-taught guys like Lee Trevino and or idiosyncratic swingers like Jim Furyk probably knew more about how to correct their games than Tiger did about correcting his. Another misconception was that Tiger was a sponge who could assimilate and apply new information seamlessly. In reality, he was something of a chronic experimenter who could get off track without guidance, as the previous couple of years had showed. He was generally very stubborn when it came to my proposed changes, as opposed to the ideas he'd come up with himself, forcing me to devote a lot of thought to coming up with ways to convince him to try things, many of which involved making the change seem like his idea. So Tiger was cursed with a lot of knowledge. Tiger knew a lot about the golf swing. He had his own judgments and his own opinions, and that, over the course of his career, maybe made him less teachable than he was at the beginning of his career. This isn't a good or a bad thing. I don't know if this had an impact on his overall success. It probably helped as a filtering mechanism, but there are elements where Tiger maybe could have been tinkered less or experimented less, but at the same time, that might have been one of the things that made him successful in the long run. I say these and I bring these things up because it's important for us to evaluate personally where we fall in that spectrum. Are we someone that willingly follows? How much resistance do we give? Why do we give that resistance? Is it coming from a place of knowledge? Is it coming from a place of doubt? Those are very important questions to have. Something else I wanted to touch on was in Hank Haney's book, he talks about how Tiger in 2008 essentially had achieved the unthinkable. He overcame winning a major essentially on one leg, and that was almost unbeatable. How do you one up that as Tiger Woods? And I guess the answer is you win the Masters after coming back from a bunch of injuries and whatnot and getting your back fused. But at the time, it seemed like Tiger had lost his edge because he had finally let himself celebrate. And that was an interesting thing to observe, is that you delay gratification. What happens after you eventually give yourself a pat on the back? That win was probably different for Tiger because he was willing to give himself a pat on the back, unlike previous ones. But we know in foresight or in hindsight that he won another major championship after that. And maybe he'll win another one again. You never know. What I want to end on with sort of the consequences of Tiger's success is this last quote. As I reflected back, I realized that I'd never thought of Tiger as happy. Whether with friends, business associates, or other players, his mother or his wife, indeed, with just about everyone except an audience of kids at one of his clinics, he seemed to keep the atmosphere around him emotionally arid. Part of it is the intense drive that was vital to his greatness. It seemed the longer he was, the best, the more isolated and lonely he became. So this is the ultimate consequence of greatness and success, is that can you do it while staying happy, while having a good experience? Do you have to be the cold-blooded assassin all the time? And is the cold-blooded assassin that alter ego Tiger had something that brought him happiness and joy? I think success is great, but looking back and enjoying life and having good experience is also very important. The one thing we do get to see in athletes is after they retire, after they get late in their career, they can change. They can spend more time with their family. They can leave the sport behind and pursue completely different creative endeavors, whatever they want to do. And that is a benefit that maybe is worth it. You sacrifice happiness in the short term to achieve what you want to achieve, and then you can do all the things that you wanted to do afterwards. And that trade-off for a lot of people is worth it. I want to touch on that as well, is that, you know, Tiger as a father, it appears that he's learned a lot from what his dad did and even some of his own pitfalls. I think Tiger's doing a particularly good job with his son. It doesn't seem like he's applying too much pressure in the sense that, hey, you're the son of the greatest golfer in the ever, and you have to pursue this path. It seems like his kids are choosing their own paths, and he's facilitating and helping them in the ways that he best knows how. His kids have an unbelievable unfair advantage compared to anyone else. They have equipment. They have the best golfer ever helping them with their golf swing. They have access to the best coaching. And Tiger also has the mental roadmap for building his kids into being mentally strong athletes. So for his son, Charlie, it seems that he is interested in becoming mentally strong as well, and Tiger can impart that knowledge down the road. To me, Tiger Woods is such a fascinating athlete. He's so complex and in some senses contradictory, as I mentioned before. You know, there's elements where he's saying he's visualizing things in one way and at one point, and then he's visualizing things another way at another point. There was so much to unpack here, from how he grew up, the programming, how much influence he had on his own mental approaches to getting into the zone, someone who probably had more experience and was better at getting in zone states than any other athlete ever. There's so much to his philosophy, his view on failure, and the strategy that went into him winning. And I'm glad that I could share this with you. Again, I apologize. It was a little long-winded. There was a lot of really what I believe to be important examples that I wanted to make sure to go into. And there's so much material that I think that we can learn from and that we can integrate into our own lives. If you enjoyed this, please let me know. If there are other athletes that you think I should study specifically, also please let me know. The best way to support this podcast is definitely check out any of the books that I've left in the show notes. Also, please share this with just one friend, as many friends as you want, but just one person is all I would ask. That's the best way to spread this knowledge, to potentially help someone who's in pursuit of greatness themselves. Thank you so much for watching. There will be some pretty cool interviews coming up and some side episodes that are focused on some of the topics that we've covered here. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, let's pursue greatness together.